Addicted to things that subtract from our lives, part 2. That's what I'm going to be discussing today. Addicted. Just think about it. Are we addicted to things that subtract from our lives? Subtraction meaning things like time with your family, time with your spouse and or loved ones. Are we addicted to work, spending too much time at work? So this title, Addicted to Things That Subtract from Our Lives, is basically an offspring, as you could say, of my original version that I did, Addiction to Subtraction, where in this one, I'm just breaking it down more specifically. So addicted to things that subtract from our lives. First, I got to say, God is God all the time. And all the time, God is God. I must say that because God is God over my life. He reigns over my life. And the addictions and things that I've been delivered from is the reason why I do this Godcast. Now, as I said in the last episode, I will be talking about the differences between drug use, drug abuse, and drug dependency. Also, about the psychological aspects and the physiological aspects of drug use, drug abuse, and drug dependency. I also mentioned in part 1 that I would talk about detoxification and withdrawal from addictions as well. And I will be talking about behavioral addictions, not in this episode, but episodes to come. So let's jump right into it. Most drugs of abuse include both psychological and physical, which is the word I use, physiology or physiological addictions. Drugs, addictions consists of both. Now, physiological addiction is when you are basically just physically addicted to a chemical substance, while psychological addiction is when you are mentally addicted to a chemical substance. It's all in your mind. It's a psychological thing with the dopamine and stuff like that going on in your brain, the reward system. So that's a whole nother topic I'm not going to get into. For now, I will be referring to drug abuse, not just any kind of dopamine rushes and rewards. We can be psychologically addicted to anything. You could be addicted to your job. You could be addicted to your spouse. You could be addicted to sex. You could be addicted to anything. I will discuss this in later episodes. So I'm kind of like just doing a sidebar here on how it kind of connects. Well, not kind of, but how it all connects. This episode is going to focus on drug use, drug abuse, and drug dependency. First is the phases that are labeled in the technical terms, the phases of drug use, abuse, and dependency to addiction. They have these phases. They're all labeled. Phase 1 is called the release stage. This is where people are in the experimental process, just using drugs for things like escaping negative feelings, by using drugs to escape loneliness, tension, boredom, anxiety, fatigue, anger, and to escape or get relief from many other things. Whatever that thing is, you can use your own mind for creation. The next phase is called the increased use phase, phase 2. This is taking and using more or larger doses or quantities of the drug or drugs. The third phase is called the preoccupation phase. This is where you always have a supply of the drug and or continuous concern for the drug. That is perceived as normal behavior in the user's mind. This is a normal thing. It's perceived as a normal behavior. Perceived. They think it's normal to chase after these drugs as such. Next phase is called the dependency phase. The dependency phase is where more of the drug is being sought after without regard for the negative presence and without regard of the presence of negative physical symptoms such as congested coughing and or shortness of breath in cases of cigarette or marijuana addiction. Blackouts from alcohol abuse, and moderate to excessive soreness and inflammation of nasal passages from snorting drugs like cocaine, crystal meth, fentanyl, and other drugs. People crush up prescription drugs and snort that. They crush up whatever kind of drug they want to get high on and snort it. This is damaging our nasal passages. The next phase, the addiction phase. The addiction phase is a more severe form of the dependency phase with intense physical and or mental dependency escalating to addiction. And last, about the phases of addiction, this would be the withdrawal phase, which is a physical and mental effect, or this is physical and mental effects, I should say plural, from not using the drug. This involves symptoms like itching, chills, tension, stomach pain, or depression from not using the addictive drug, or an entire set of psychological concerns, mainly impossible to satisfy cravings from the drug, almost impossible to satisfy unless you get the drug. Now let's get into the drug use, the drug abuse, and the drug addiction, which this episode part 2 is focusing on and around. First, everyone and anyone can be addicted to something psychologically and behaviorally. We don't want it to be something that is subtracting beneficial things from our lives because of the negative impact it has on the outcome in the long run. First, I'm going to talk to you about drug use. I'll lay the foundation in the phases though. Drug use is the use of a chemical substance, mostly identified with things like recreational use and or experimental use, or like I mentioned in phase 1 of the phases of addiction being the relief phase. Things I mentioned in that phase also applies to just using drugs. And I use that term loosely, just using drugs, because no one should be just using drugs unless they're prescribed by a doctor. With most drugs, the user, with most drugs, say the user, is at risk of moving from occasional use to regular use, or from moderate to heavy use, and then to chronic use or persistent use. Next is drug abuse. Drug abuse is the willful misuse of either illicit or licit drugs for perceived necessity, for recreation, or convenience. This is perceived. This is in your mind. You're abusing the drug, but this is how you look at it. These are necessities. This is recreation. This is fun. But you're using more of the drugs. You're abusing the drugs. You're misusing the drugs. Now, licit drugs, as I mentioned before, licit drugs are legal drugs. That's just a technical term for it, medical term, whatever you want to call it, counselor term, treatment term, psychological term, whatever. And illicit drugs are basically just illegal drugs. It's illicit, licit, illegal, legal. That's all. Those are just big words for layman's terms that we call legal and illegal. Now, drug abuse differs from drug use in that drug use is taking or using drugs. That's the use, whereas drug abuse is more intense and often misuse of drugs, often to the point of addiction. Now, the third thing I'm going to talk about is the dependency. And drug dependence is a close relation to addiction. Keep in mind, they go parallel to each other, side by side. You have to have the dependence to be addicted. And I want to say vice versa, but I'm not really clear on that. Not 100% sure. But I do know this. Both physical and psychological factors cause drug dependence. Again, psychological dependence is being mentally dependent or mental dependence to the drug. This is being a state of mind. This is being in a state of mind, a strong state of mind, mentally, such as psychologically addicted to drugs like cocaine or crystal meth, cigarettes, psychologically, and some things are psychological and physical, as I mentioned, but most of these things are psychological. There's a host of other chemical substances that will cause this effect where it's in your mind. Sometimes, believe it or not, these can be some of the hardest ones to actually quit and or kick the habit. I've dealt with cigarettes. I dealt with all these things I'm talking about. Cigarettes are one of the toughest things to quit. Most of it is psychological, but the nicotine, and there are some chemicals in there that are addictive. I'm not going to get into that. We're talking about physical and psychological dependence. So psychological dependence refers to the need that the user may feel for continued use of the drug to experience its effects. Physical dependence, technical term, they call it physiology. Anyway, physical dependence is the need to continue taking the drug to avoid withdrawal symptoms that often include feelings of discomfort and illness. Withdrawal symptoms of any drug ain't no joke. Been there, done that, don't want the t-shirt, don't want to go back. One of the worst ones would be addiction to opioids. Opioid addiction, the worst. Detoxification, which I'll talk later on in another episode about detoxification and detoxifying. So, with repeated use, there is a tendency to become dependent and addicted to most psychoactive drugs. And lastly, addiction. Drug dependence kind of covers drug addiction, but it's more intense. As I was talking about, the withdrawal symptoms sometimes can be excruciating. Everyone and anyone can become addicted to something or have an addiction. And yes, we can be addicted to anything. Right now, I'm addicted to Jesus. I'm addicted to the Lord. I will discuss that kind of addiction, like behaviorals and psychologicals, in the next episode about behavioral addictions, how we can have uncontrollable urges to anything. That's in the next episode. Excuse me for the sidebar, but let me stay on point about what I'm talking about here. First, I got to tell you, drugs are an equal opportunity affliction. Now, back to drug addiction and addiction to drugs. Drug addiction refers to chronic attachment to drugs and psychological and physical dependence to this drug. Psychological dependence, the mental inability to stop using drugs. Psychological, the mental, psyche, it's in the psyche, it's in the mind that you cannot stop. You feel this craving, you feel this urge. It's a feeling. It's a feeling. It can be overcame. It's not the same as physical, which can be also overcame. We can overcome all things. So addiction is characterized and defined in some instances as such: a compulsive use of a substance that harms a person's health, relationships, school, or work performance. It harms any productive work in your life, any productive work. That's where it subtracts. Because if it's taken away what you're producing adds, using, subtract. So we are addicted to subtraction. Things that make it go, Also, drug addiction is labeled as a chronic disease. Yes, it is in the medical list of diseases. It is a chronic disease characterized by compulsive or uncontrollable drug seeking and use of drugs, despite the harmful consequences and changes in the brain, which can be long or lasting changes and addiction. Wow. Thank God that I am not addicted to anything anymore. And if I knew half of the stuff I knew now, I would have never been addicted in the first place. Now, I know that, I forget the word besides, just let me get back on point. Drug addiction involves non-casual or non-recreational drug use. Non-casual, non-recreational drug use. A frequent symptom is intense psychological preoccupation with obtaining and consuming drugs. Most often, and in some cases, depending on the drug, physical symptoms of withdrawal are manifested when craving for the drug is not satisfied. When that craving is not satisfied, it will make you do some horrendous, crazy stuff, unimaginable stuff that you would never, ever, ever, ever do in your normal state of mind, state of being, without that withdrawal symptom. What is the word I'm trying to think of? Without that withdrawal overtaking you. Without that thing overtaking your thought process, your acting, and everything that's within you for that drug. So today, more emphasis is placed on the psychological craving and the mental attachment to the drug than on the more physiological based withdrawal symptoms of addiction. Well, in conclusion, abuse of drugs by some people may represent an attempt to relieve underlying psychiatric disorders. You can have two things going on. You can have other kind of issues going on, emotionally, mentally, and all these different things. And you could be addicted to something to relieve that, to get rid of that. So an attempt to relieve underlying psychiatric disorders. Now, also people who perceive themselves as drug users. Oh, I'm just a drug user. I'm just a recreational user. I'm just I just use drugs. People who perceive themselves as drug users are more likely to develop serious drug abuse problems. You're more likely to develop an abuse situation. Stay tuned, people, to my next episode. I'm trying to give you this stuff in little bites and pieces because my first episode was way too much, too overwhelming. And I'm trying to keep it short. So I want to keep these under 10 minutes, at most under 15. With that being said, the next episode is going to be about behavioral addiction and the detoxification process of drugs. Once again, addiction is an equal opportunity affliction to bondage, to the bondage of drugs and to the subtraction of you. Physically, mentally, financially, emotionally, it just keeps on subtracting. It just keeps taking away and taking away and taking away. This thing called addiction, this thing attached to bondage. I should say bondage is attached to addiction. God is God all the time. I love you, people. If one person got anything out of this, God bless you. Please give me a like, subscribe, and share it. Also, I want to say, peace be with you. Much love to you. And may God do exceedingly, abundantly, above all you can think, above all you can think and or ask. And I may have it a little reverse. I think it says above all you can ask or think, I believe. But in any event, be blessed exceedingly, abundantly, above all, according to God. Yeah, paraphrase a little bit there if y'all know the scripture, but you'll hear this a lot when I'm doing my videos. You'll get more of it. You'll get more of it. And you'll get more. God is God all the time. And all the time, God is God. I can't be ashamed of my gospel. I can't be ashamed of my God. I got to speak it, preach it, get it in where it can fit in anytime possible. God bless you all. I love you. Peace.